Okay, so we are almost done here. The last thing I wanted to show you is how to graph by hand, how to do by hand a sine wave or a cosine wave where the period has changed, where the period is different than 2 pi. So let's go ahead and go back to our notes, and we can go ahead and just use this example of y equals sine of 2x. We'll keep going with that one. So we have our y equals sine of 2x, and our period is pi. We're using the period of pi now instead of the period of 2 pi. So to graph this guy, I need it to be scrunched up a bit more. So when I take a look at that, let's go ahead and just draw our axes again. There's our x-axis and our y-axis. I'm going to have an amplitude of 1. So my amplitude equals 1. That's pretty normal. And then my period is just going to be pi instead of 2 pi. I'm going to still make this one go out to 2 pi, but keep in mind that it needs to be scrunched down so the entire phase of the sine function will fit inside of just 1 pi. So to be able to do this, you can make your xy chart again if you would like to. I am actually just going to reference the normal sine graph that I made up here. So my normal sine graph that I've made up here, remember I start at 0, then at pi I'm at 0, and at 2 pi I'm at 0. At pi halves I'm going to be up to 1, and at 3 pi halves I'm down to -1. So if I were to take this and I just want to scrunch it, so I take those two lines, those two blue lines, and I scrunch them down so it all fits inside of just 1 pi, then I'm basically just cutting everything in half. So where I had 2 pi, I'm now going to be at pi. Where I had pi, I'm now going to be at pi halves. Where I was at pi halves, I'm going to be at pi fourths. And so I can go back down to this graph that I'm creating down here, and I can reflect that in here. So let's go ahead and here's my pi halves, pi over 2, there's my pi over 4, there's my 3 pi over 4. So I'm going to follow that idea of, well, at 0, 0, I'm still at the same point, I'm still at 0, 0, but now when I go to pi, pi is the same as what it used to be for my 2 pi. So it's also at that 0, 0, or it's at that 0 point. And then again, I have at pi halves another point at 0. Well, previously at pi halves, I was up at 1. So now at pi fourths, I'm going to be up at 1. And at 3 pi fourths, I'm going to be down to -1. So I'm taking my graph and I'm scrunching it up. I'm scrunching it so it just fits into this one period. And you can do that anytime that you have a sine wave that you're trying to graph and it doesn't have a normal period of 2 pi. You can just take each value and remember where it goes. What's the general format of your sine wave? And so how is it going to behave? Let's go ahead and just continue this one. So it goes through here at 3 pi halves. It's going to pass at 0. This one needs to go all the way up to 1. This one needs to go down to -1. So let's go back up to this color here. So it'll come up, it'll pass through there, it'll come back down, pass through, and then up again, and it'll continue that format. The same thing will happen on the left side. It'll keep that little scrunchiness to it. Oh, I didn't go down nearly far enough. Wow, sorry about that. So there is my sine graph with a period of pi. So this is y equals sine of 2x. So anytime that your period changes, you just take your function your sine or your cosine wave, and you scrunch it down or you make it bleed out until, no, bleed out was a terrible word for that. Sorry about that. So you either scrunch it down or you stretch it out until it becomes just one repetition inside of that interval. So you can continue to do that. I used the period of pi, so it was just 1/2 of it. You might go into 1/6 of it if you were to do that. So let's use y equals sine of, how about, let's just go 6x. Then I would get my period, my t, as it is often other times referred to. Then I get 2 pi over 6. And so my period here is pi thirds. So when I do this one, then I'm going to look at my graph, and I'm going to go out to pi thirds. And I know that my sine graph, it still goes to the amplitude of 1 and -1. I know that it's still going to go to those points, but I need to make the entire period, I need the entire graph to just go in between this pi over 3. And so I know I'm going to need points that are halfway in between, so at pi over 6, and then I need halfway in between that, so at pi over 12 is another important point. And that would make this one, what is that? That's pi over 12. That's 2 pi over 12. So this one is 3 pi over 12. This one's 3 pi over 12. So I'm halfway in between my pi over 6 and my pi over 3. And I'm halfway in between 0 and my pi over 6. Well, then I know it continues to follow that same pattern where it passes through 0 at these 3 points. Then it passes through 1 and -1 at the other points. So I get this graph that goes through these points. Remember to label your different points when you are drawing these graphs so that people know what they're looking at. They need a scale. They need to know what is the scale that you are using when you draw your graph. So that is how you would graph a sine wave with a different period. Your cosine is going to be similar. It will just use the different points that the cosine graph normally goes with. So it'll start up at 1 and then it'll end at 1. All right, so good luck on your homework. Feel free to email me questions. I will try to respond as quick as I can.